Okay, so let's dive into this whole Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson thing at AT&T Stadium, Netflix's first live sports event. Kind of a clash of generations, right? Internet fame, stepping into the ring with the legend, the baddest man on the planet. You probably know how the fight ended, but this deep dive isn't about the final score. It's about what this fight really tells us about boxing, about celebrity, and maybe even about how we deal with our heroes getting older.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this event sort of captured like the cultural zeitgeist, right? It wasn't just a boxing match, it was this collision of worlds. You had the legacy of Mike Tyson, this icon of power and athleticism, facing off against Jake Paul, who represents this new wave of internet-driven fame and self-promotion.
And that age gap, 31 years. It's hard to even imagine how this matchup came to be.
Huh.
But to really understand the significance, I think we need to rewind a bit. We all know Tyson's legendary status, dominating the heavyweight scene, that ferocious knockout power. I mean, he earned that baddest man on the planet title, retired in 2005. But then, that exhibition match with Roy Jones Jr. in 2020, it reignited the world's fascination with Iron Mike.
That 2020 fight was crucial. It showed there was still a huge appetite for Tyson, even if it was more about nostalgia than a genuine comeback. And then you have Jake Paul, starting as a YouTube prankster and transitioning into boxing. He's actually become a surprisingly competent fighter, which adds a layer of intrigue to this whole event.
Right. It wasn't just like a washed-up legend taking on a total amateur. Paul's wins against former MMA fighters had already made people question if he was actually a decent boxer. So he had this weird mix of curiosity. Could Tyson recapture some of his former glory? And could Paul actually hold his own against a boxing icon, even one past his prime?
Yeah, and that's where the cultural significance really comes in. This event was like a perfect storm of celebrity, nostalgia, and this internet-driven hype machine, Netflix getting involved, streaming it live, celebrities in the audience. It all added to the spectacle.
Even the pre-fight stuff was pure theater. The weigh-in where Tyson slapped Paul after Paul stepped on his foot. The walkout music. Phil Collins for Paul, a jab at Tyson's hangover cameo. Pretty funny, right? And then Tyson with that Ja Rule, G-Z, and DMX track.
Yeah.
Definitely aimed at getting the crowd pumped up.
Exactly. It was all carefully orchestrated to play into these pre-existing narratives about both fighters. Tyson, the unpredictable, volatile force. Paul, the cocky, attention-grabbing internet personality. They both played their roles perfectly, building up the anticipation for the fight itself.
And then you had this classic underdog versus champion dynamic, except the underdog was a social media star. It messed with people's expectations. Who were you supposed to root for? Did you find yourself drawn to either side?
I think that's a really important point. This fight tapped into something deeper than just boxing. It forced us to confront our own biases about celebrity, age, and athletic achievement. It wasn't a clear-cut good guy versus bad guy situation. You had people rooting for Tyson out of nostalgia, wanting to see him recapture some of his past glory, but also acknowledging that Paul had put in the work and earned his spot in the ring.
It definitely made for a more complex viewing experience than your typical boxing match. And speaking of the fight itself, let's dive into what actually happened in the ring, because that's where things get even more interesting.
So the fight itself, it wasn't a slugfest. It was actually quite tactical, particularly on Paul's side. He knew he couldn't go toe-to-toe with Tyson, even an older Tyson. So instead, he utilized his reach advantage, keeping Tyson at a distance and consistently landing those jabs.
Yeah, you mentioned Paul's jabs. It seemed like every commentator was talking about them. Why were they so effective? Especially against someone like Tyson.
Well, it's interesting. People often underestimate the jab. It's not flashy, but it's the foundation of good boxing. And Paul used it masterfully to control the pace and frustrate Tyson. Tyson's always relied on aggressive rushes, getting inside to land those power punches. But Paul's jab kept disrupting Tyson's rhythm, preventing him from setting up those big shots.
So Paul actually used Tyson's own aggression against him.
Exactly, by keeping his distance. Paul exposed one of Tyson's weaknesses at this stage in his career, his decreased mobility. Tyson just couldn't close the gap effectively. And then there were those other signs, the knee brace, the glove biting. It was clear he wasn't the same explosive fighter we remember from his prime.
It's kind of heartbreaking to see, isn't it? You want to believe these legends can defy time, but Father Time is undefeated, as they say.
It is a stark reminder of the limits of human physicality. But it also raises an interesting question about our expectations. Were we setting Tyson up for failure by placing him on this pedestal of nostalgia? Were we hoping for a glimpse of the baddest man on the planet when that version of Tyson simply doesn't exist anymore?
And that feeds into this whole conversation about the future of boxing.
Hmm.
Is there even space for these kinds of events, where the spectacle and the personalities overshadow the athletic competition itself?
Yeah, that's the key question. This fight really blurred the lines between sport and entertainment. You had the traditional elements of boxing, the skill, the strategy, the physical endurance, but they were intertwined with this celebrity-driven hype machine.
And that's where things get tricky. You mentioned earlier that this event attracted a new audience to boxing. But is that a good thing for the sport in the long run? Are these new fans interested in the nuances of boxing, the sweet science, or are they just here for the celebrity drama?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure. On the one hand, any influx of new fans can be seen as a positive. It expands the market, generates revenue, and keeps the sport relevant. But on the other hand, there's a risk of alienating the core boxing fans, those who value the traditional aspects of the sport. It's a delicate balance.
It's like boxing is at a crossroads, trying to figure out how to appeal to both the hardcore fans and this new generation who are more accustomed to the fast-paced world of social media and internet entertainment.
Precisely. And there's no easy answer. But events like Paul versus Tyson force us to confront these questions. They challenge our assumptions about what boxing is and what it can be. They make us consider the role of entertainment, celebrity, and nostalgia in the evolution of a sport.
And what about the fighters themselves? Their post-fight comments really added another layer to this whole narrative.
Tyson's comments were particularly introspective. He said, "I didn't prove nothing to anybody, only to myself." It suggests a certain level of self-awareness, a recognition that this fight was more about personal growth and overcoming challenges than about reclaiming past glory.
It almost makes his performance more admirable in a way. He wasn't clinging to the past. He was using this fight as a platform for personal exploration, even if it meant exposing his vulnerabilities.
And on the other side, you have Paul, still aiming for bigger names in boxing. He called out Canelo Alvarez after the fight, which is audacious, to say the least. But it also shows his ambition. He's not content with just being a YouTube star who boxes. He wants to be taken seriously as a boxer, even if it means disrupting the traditional hierarchy of the sport.
And then there's that whole cryptic comment from Tyson about potentially fighting Logan Paul instead. Was he serious? Or was that just Tyson being Tyson, throwing out a soundbite to keep people talking?
It's hard to tell with Tyson. He's always been a master of self-promotion. But there's also a sense that he's genuinely enjoying this later stage of his career, where he can participate in these spectacle events without the pressure of needing to be Iron Mike all the time.
So you think a Mike Tyson versus Logan Paul fight could actually happen?
It's definitely within the realm of possibility. And if it does, it will undoubtedly generate a massive amount of hype and revenue. It would be another example of this blurring of lines between sport and entertainment. And it would raise all the same questions we've been discussing about the future of boxing.
It would be fascinating to see how it plays out. But for now, it remains a hypothetical. What's certain is that this whole Paul versus Tyson event has opened up a Pandora's box of questions about boxing, celebrity, and the evolving nature of sports entertainment.
And those questions aren't going away anytime soon. This fight was a catalyst for a larger conversation. And it's a conversation worth having.
Absolutely. So as we head into the final part of this deep dive, let's shift our focus to the individual fighters themselves, their motivations, their legacies, and what this whole experience might mean for them in the long run. So we've talked about the fight itself, the spectacle surrounding it, and its impact on the future of boxing. But for me, the most compelling aspect of this whole event was this theme of legacy.
Yeah, legacy is kind of woven throughout this whole narrative, isn't it? You have Tyson, this iconic figure, trying to navigate his place in a sport that's moved on without him. And then you have Paul, this newcomer building his legacy in a completely different way, leveraging his online fame to challenge the established order.
It's like we were watching two different eras of boxing collide in that ring. On one side, you have Tyson, the embodiment of raw power and aggression, representing a time when boxing was dominated by these larger-than-life personalities. And then you have Paul, the savvy self-promoter, utilizing social media and this new era of entertainment to build his brand and challenge the traditional boxing hierarchy.
And it's fascinating how those contrasting approaches to legacy played out in the fight itself. Tyson, even with his diminished physical abilities, still had those flashes of brilliance, you know?
Yeah.
Those moments where you could see the baddest man on the planet lurking beneath the surface.
Like that left hook in the 5th round. It didn't connect cleanly, but for a split second, you saw that familiar intensity in Tyson's eyes. It was a reminder of the power he once possessed. It made you wonder what might have been if you were 10 or 15 years younger.
Exactly. But those moments were fleeting, and that's where the poignancy of this fight really comes in. We were witnessing the twilight of a legend, a fighter grappling with realities of age, and the inevitable decline of physical prowess. It's a story that resonates with all of us on some level, right? We all have our heroes, our icons. And it can be difficult to reconcile those images of greatness with the natural process of aging.
It's especially tough in a sport like boxing, where physical dominance is so central to the narrative. You mentioned earlier that Tyson seemed to be fighting for something more personal in this fight, something beyond just winning or losing. What do you think he was trying to prove? Maybe to himself, even more than to the audience.
I think Tyson was trying to find peace with his past, to reconcile the Iron Mike persona with the man he is today. You know, his post-fight comments about only needing to prove something to himself suggest a shift away from external validation. He wasn't seeking to recapture his former glory. He was testing his own limits, exploring what was still possible at this stage in his life.
There's a certain dignity in that, isn't there? A recognition of his own mortality, a willingness to embrace his vulnerabilities. It wasn't the triumphant comeback story that some fans might have hoped for, but it was a compelling narrative nonetheless. It was about resilience, self-acceptance, and the ongoing pursuit of personal growth, even in the face of physical limitations.
And in a way, that makes his performance even more meaningful, right? He wasn't clinging to the past. He was using this fight as a platform for self-discovery, and that's something we can all relate to. Regardless of our age or profession, we're all constantly evolving, adapting to new challenges, trying to make sense of our place in the world.
And on the other side of that spectrum, you have Jake Paul, who's still very much in the process of building his legacy. He's using his platform to challenge the traditional boxing establishment, bringing in a new audience, and redefining what it means to be a successful boxer in this digital age. He's not just fighting in the ring, he's fighting for a place at the table, for recognition as a legitimate force in the sport.
And that's what makes his trajectory so intriguing. He's disrupting the status quo,
Yeah.
forcing boxing to adapt to this new landscape of internet fame and self-promotion. He's a polarizing figure, no doubt, but he's forcing us to confront our own biases about what constitutes athletic legitimacy. Can someone who rose to fame through YouTube pranks and social media stunts be considered a serious boxer?
It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer. And it's a question that goes beyond just boxing. It speaks to the broader cultural shifts we're seeing, where the lines between entertainment, celebrity, and athletic achievement are becoming increasingly blurred.
And that's why this Paul versus Tyson event was so significant. It wasn't just a fight, it was a microcosm of this larger cultural conversation. It forced us to confront our own assumptions about legacy, about the evolving nature of sports, and about the power of personality in the digital age.
It was a clash of generations, a clash of styles, a clash of values, and it left us with more questions than answers, which, in a way, is the mark of a truly compelling event. It sparked a debate, and that debate is still ongoing.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? They take us beyond the surface, beyond the headlines, and invite us to engage with these complex, multifaceted issues. They encourage us to question our assumptions, to consider different perspectives, and to arrive at our own conclusions.
So as you reflect on this Paul versus Tyson event, remember that it was more than just a fight. It was a cultural moment, a reflection of our changing times, and a catalyst for a conversation that's far from over.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. You might be surprised by what you discover